Is a topography survey performed for a site plan the same as a topography survey performed for design purposes? So engineering design, architectural design. No, they're not the same. As a general rule, there could be exceptions to that, but they're typically not the same. So how are they different? How is a topographic survey for a site plan different than a topographic survey for design? And why? Why are they different? So let's talk about how they're different first. So I'm going to give you 4 ways that a topography survey for a site plan is different than a topography survey for design purposes. Okay, so here's reason, reason number 1. Okay, so this is the first thing that makes them different. A topography survey for a site plan does not typically include highly accurate elevation data. So sometimes, depending on the local agency requirements, we may show elevation contours on a site plan, but we don't typically show the same amount of elevation data on a site plan that we would on a topo for design purposes. So that's one difference. A second related difference is that a topography survey for a site plan doesn't usually include a highly accurate surface model. That's a 3D model of the ground surface. Again, that's something we would do for design purposes, but that we don't necessarily need to do for a site plan. The reason why is because typically the government agency, when they're reviewing a site plan, they're just looking at kind of the overall scheme for what you're trying to do, your proposed improvements. They're not yet reviewing the actual engineering design. The second difference is that a topography survey for a site plan is not necessarily focused on design needs. So for example, where the utilities are at, or where the conform lines are, that's where the proposed improvements are going to tie into existing topography. So when we go out to do a topographic survey for a site plan, we don't have an idea always of what the design is going to be, where the proposed improvements are, and we probably haven't worked with an engineer quite yet on the detailed design, so we know exactly what we're surveying for the design. So it's too early for that. We're not that far along in the process. Really, the purpose of a topography survey for site plan is to understand the overall existing conditions on the parcel and the context, what's around the parcel, okay, that's being developed or around the project site. Okay, the fourth difference is a topography survey for a site plan may need to address land use or environmental issues that are unrelated to the design. And so you go out to do a topography survey for design purposes, and you may not be worried about those things, but when you're doing it for a site plan, you may certainly be worried about those things. So I'll just give you an example. If you're doing a topography survey for a site plan, you might need to collect the heights on adjacent buildings, or you might need to identify the types of trees that are on a parcel, or you might need to identify the location of wetlands. So things like that the designer may not care about, the architect or the engineer, but that you need to address for land use planning or environmental purposes. So that's how a topography survey for a site plan can be different from a topography survey for design purposes. Why are they different? Why do we do 2 different kinds of topography surveys? Why not just do a topography survey that meets the needs of both? You can do that, and we do that sometimes for clients. So if a client wants to pay for that, we can go out and do one topography survey that meets the needs of both the site plan and the final design. But we don't do that often. I would say it's certainly not the majority. It would be the minority of the time. So why not? Why do we do those 2 different types of topography surveys? One reason is we want to, typically when we're in the site plan phase, we want to keep the upfront costs low. Because that's money the client is putting at risk. They don't know yet, typically, if we're doing a site plan, whether or not they're going to get permission to build what they want. And so we don't want to go spend a ton of money on a design survey and then find out that the client can't do what they wanted to do with the property. The other reason is we want to typically keep the level of detail low on the topo for the site plan because we don't always know the location of the design improvements. So that's not as big of a deal on a small, compact urban parcel where the whole site will be developed. But, you know, as an example, I'm working on a project right now with a parcel that's about 20 acres. We're not going to develop the whole 20 acres. We're only going to develop maybe an acre or 2. The location of that acre or 2 on the 20-acre parcel may change depending on the feedback that we get from the planning department. So it doesn't make sense to go out and do a design level topo of all 20 acres. We're only going to need design level topo for 1 or 2 acres. And so we did a less detailed topographic survey to just meet the needs of the site plan. Once we get some feedback from the planning department and we know where we're going to be able to put our improvements, then we can go back in and do a detailed survey that saves the client money. So I'm going to have Lori, our content marketing specialist, link to some related videos in the description. One of those is going to be, when do you need a survey for a site plan? And the other one is, does the California Building Code require that you have a boundary survey for a site plan? So if you're going to get a site plan, don't go to siteplan.com and hire some Yahoo and pay him $500. Work with a good surveyor, private land planner, get a good site plan. But there's nothing wrong with talking to your surveyor about what kind of site plan you need and when, what kind of topography survey you need for the site plan, and have him or her give you some options. Maybe you don't have to do a full design topo for the site plan. In fact, oftentimes that's a bad idea. It's a foolish use of the client's money. And so have that conversation with the surveyor that's working on your site plan.